Welcome back. In my last video, I talked about the versatility of the 3006 Springfield and how you didn't have to shoot it at factory velocity levels of 3,000 feet per second with a 150 grain bullet and 20 foot-pounds of recoil, and that you could tune it down from its destructive levels at close range in the woods, for instance, and its rather unfun recoil for plinking, and frankly it uses up an awful lot of powder. If you're a hand loader, you can simply tune it down and manage your own velocities down to whatever level you desire. Well, I alluded to the fact that I was going to show you how to do this process, but the simple fact of the matter was I didn't have any 3006 brass on hand from which to work. And I really didn't want to go out and buy a bag of 50 cases or anything like that to do this with. But I do have an awful lot of 270 brass on hand, so in my next video, I'll show you the process of, how to manage those loads and how to select loads that will tune your 3006 down to whatever levels you want. But in this video, what I want to do is show you how to reform brass. So let's get at it at the workbench and I'll show you the rules and how to do it. Okay, it goes without saying that the very first thing that you need to have are the dies that are necessary to load the cartridge that you desire. So this is not a 3006 die, but I want to demonstrate why I like this particular system. This is a Lube Resizing die, and I've already taken it apart with a wrench because this is torqued down very hard. But I'll show you the reason why I like Lube dies, especially for reforming brass. This is not a expander ball in the generic sense. This is a tapered expanding shaft, and it's very, very easy to expand brass with this long taper because it's a gradual taper and it tends not to hang up on the brass and cause it to sometimes split or to yank it out of shape or to basically to deform the shoulder angle, because this is a very, very long taper. It makes a nice entry into the case mouth. And it also too has it's a one piece where you don't have a collet holding on to the decapping pin. And as I showed in another previous video, if you should have an unseen obstruction inside your case that would normally break the decapping pin, this one instead will basically push up through the collet. This is a split collet right here, not just a nut, but it's a split collet that will allow that shaft to float directly up under pressure and preserve this decapping pin. And if you should ever get a case inadvertently stuck, I showed in another video how it's very easy to get a case driven out by simply by driving that pin down through, by loosening this collet and driving this with one blow. Usually is all it takes, and pushing the case body out of your die. Usually your case is recoverable rather than having a stuck case that you have to drill and tap and to extract with a screw. You can instead just simply pop it out of your die and go back to using it, so you don't waste your nice brass, say if you have a lapware case. So that's essential. You got to have the die. Then the next thing you have to have is a compatible case with which to work. Now I've got here, these are 270 cases, and as you can see, these have been, I also annealed these recently, so you can see the discoloration here, so they're easy to work with. I don't have to worry about splitting the cases as I expand them, and I've got a separate video on how to anneal brass. But the most important thing of all is making sure that the case is compatible. Now, I can say just matter-of-factly that any 270 case is compatible and can be sized up to make a 3006 case, or vice versa, simply because their overall dimensions are identical, with the exception of their case body length, the entire length of the case, and the diameter of the mouth. Other than that, they're identical cases, so I can say matter-of-factly that that's true. But if you have different cases to work with and you want to resize them, you just have to adhere to certain principles. First of all, try to get a case which most closely is in proportion to the one that you desire to make. In other words, the same general length. It should be, it certainly has to be at least as long between the case head and one of the two shoulder measurements. Now in this Lee book right here, this Lee book details not only the two shoulder measurements, but it details the headspace measurement, which is the one that's at the datum line, that's halfway between the neck and the shoulder. That headspace measurement is something that I don't see on other loading manuals. It's kind of a handy thing to have just to reference. If you have a headspace measurement, which is the same from the case that you've got on hand to the one that you're desiring to make, you're automatically good to go. Now, if it's at least as long at one of the other two shoulder measurements, you should have no problem whatsoever, because that's simply a matter of fire forming the case when you get done, and it will change. It'll change either in the die if the angle of the shoulder is greater, it will reform in the die when you're resizing it, and if it's less and measures to one of those two measurements, it will simply reform when you fire your case. Now, there can't be any radical reforming without going through some heavy processing of the case. I've made, for instance, 22-250 cases from 3006 brass. It's kind of a long, time-consuming process because it involves a lot of trimming, annealing, and before you can do anything with the case, it has to also be reamed out. The neck has to be reamed out on the inside in order to remove the accumulation of brass that occurs from reducing its overall length. And the brass builds up very heavily and has to be reamed out, and that has to be done generally in stages because it's a process. So you always try to get whatever case is that most closely the size of the one that you want to end up with. The second critical measurement is the head size. If you have, and also the body size, you can't use a case which has got a rebated rim, which there are a couple of them out there, but it has to be the same style rim, and also it's got to be the same head size. Now, generally speaking, there are sometimes slight variations in these measurements right here that throw people off. If it fits in the same shell holder, in other words, this device right here, if it fits in the shell holder of your press and it's got the same number shell holder, that's generally all you need to have. You can check the cases in your chamber and make sure that your extractor and ejecting system work with it. But generally speaking, even though the measurements may differ slightly, as long as it fits in the same shell holder, you're good to go. So let's get into the process of actually reforming a case. Now, I've already started processing some of these cases over this side here, and this side I've yet to do. You do need to have a good case lube. Now, you can use any case lube. Please don't write to me and tell me what your favorite case lube is, because I dealt with that in the previous video. My personal favorite case lube is this one right here, because it's an industrial metal reforming and dye lube. So this is industrial lube that comes in big 5-gallon drums, and it's used in factories for reforming auto body panels and things like that. I should say for forming auto body panels and for all sorts of resizing operations, including making brass. Well, that's what we're doing on a very small scale. We're making new brass. You need to have a good case neck brush. This one here, and this is not a bronze bristle brush, and it's not a bore brush. This is a case neck brush, and you can get these from, this one here happens to be a 40-something year old. I think it's about a 45-year-old Lyman brush that I got years ago, and it unscrews, and it has different. I think it has 3 different diameter bristles that cover pretty much everything. So you need that to apply just a trace of lubrication. I'll show you how we do that. And by the way, the reason I like this stuff is because it can be used either wet or dry, and when it dries rather quickly, and it's water soluble, meaning that when I'm all done, I can simply throw all my reloaded ammo into the same tub that I shook these around in, or into any other bowl. Put a little bit of warm water and some Dawn dish detergent, and just wash them right off, and they come off perfectly clean without having to use any heavy degreasers or wiping them off. You know, I've done it all. I've done the lanolin thing and all that stuff. Trust me, this is so easy. And I do not recommend sprays, because I mean, it just makes a mess. You get spray everywhere, and the other thing is that you'll get spray onto the shoulder, and if you get too much on there, you're going to end up with case dents, and we'll talk about that. All right, so now you just, and it's good to have a loading block, or at least two tubs that you can work from one side to the other and keep things organized. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you how to lube these up. Now, this is only the second tube of this I've ever owned in the last 12 years. Yeah, it's been 12 years since I started using Lube, and I use it in my 223 cases that I do by the hundreds and everything else. It just lasts so long. And for doing all this, I just put a little daub right here. That's all I have. It's practically the same thing that I started out with the first batch of cases. I really put too much on there, because all we're going to do is just daub my finger in it, just like that. That's all we need to do. Now, you can also do it with a tub, and I showed you how to do that in my lubrication video. But this is all you need to do, and that slight trace on the case is all that you need. So we'll do those like that, and I've got enough on my fingers to do the next case. You don't need to have a lot of lubrication. I see people doing all kinds of things that are really excessive. The biggest problem that people have with lubricating cases is frankly they think they need to oil it right up. That is the last thing you want to do. If you know, in the old days we used to put lubrication, an oil-based or a lanolin-based lubricant on a pad. It was a foam pad or a flannel pad, and would roll the cases on there, and that would apply just a trace of lubrication on the case, and that's all you're endeavoring to do. You do not want to apply a lot of lubrication. Under no circumstances put lubrication on the shoulder, period. Never, ever, ever put lubrication on the shoulder. You put lubrication on the shoulder, and it's going to have no place to go except to dent that shoulder. There's nothing there that's going to stick, because the shoulder simply it just enters the die, and it hits the end of the die, and it does not have any need for lubrication there. And any lubrication is going to cause a dent, with the exception of tumbling it in this and allowing it to dry. The slight amount of dry lubrication that will occur on the shoulder will not dent the case, but it's the presence of any liquid form of lubrication that will build up and hydraulically dent your case. So whenever you see wrinkled cases at the shoulder or dented cases, that's absolutely too much lubrication. So right there you can see I don't have any on my fingers at all, hardly. It's just enough to put you can feel it's a little bit sticky. Now, after we do that, we'll take lubrication. Actually, I've got plenty here I can work with to finish up this process. Put some on my finger, and just rub it on the brush like that. That's all I want. I don't want to have a big gob of it on there. And one pass through all those cases, and you can do them in your block. Just one pass is all you need, and you don't have to keep on relubing that brush. And you know, it's not necessary to write me and tell me that you do it, 3 times, 4 times. I've been doing this now for close to 50 years. This is what I do. It works. So that's my experience about it. So I'm going to continue to lube these up, and then we'll go over to the dye. Now let me say this. A neck resizing operation, as we're doing right now, changing from 270 up to 3006, or from 3006 down to 270, or 2506 or something like that, is a fairly gentle reforming operation. I do recommend that, however, that you have annealed necks, or at least new brass. If it's new brass, then it is annealed, or even if it's once fired brass, you should have no difficulty whatsoever. But if it's been fired more than once, I would recommend that you anneal the necks, as I showed in a previous video, so that you can soften the brass back to factory specs. That's a gentle reforming operation. What I consider to be a moderately heavy case forming operation would be, for instance, to change a 257 Roberts case. This is a 7 millimeter by 57 Mauser case down to, say, a 243. That's a fairly radical maneuver. It's certainly doable, and it's something I've done many times. Again, the brass that I'm working with has to be at least as long as the new case. And in this event, if you're sizing it down to 243, all you're doing is simply taking the case of identical head dimensions, which is the same as a 3006, and they have virtually identical dimensions throughout the case body. So all you need to do is reduce the length of the shoulder down to the new length, and at the same time, in this case, in this event, you would actually be sizing down the neck as well. That requires a little bit more effort, and you have to use a little bit more care in making sure that you lube your case. In that event, I would use enough lubrication to haze the brass up very good. Let me see if I can show you how much that would be. You don't want to apply too much. Believe it or not, it's not so much the amount of brass that you're moving. It's how it's done. So in this fashion, you notice that I'm not lubricating up here too much. I want to be very careful to apply just a trace of lubrication up there, because that's going to become my new shoulder. Wipe off any excess lube. Do not have, I recommend this type of lubrication and allow it to dry. You don't want to have any buildup of lubrication up there, because that's going to be a new shoulder and you're going to create hydraulic dents. So allow that to dry, and you can see there's not an awful lot on there, but there's enough on there so that it will ensure that it doesn't get stuck. And if you're sizing down, you can also put a small trace on the neck, not on the shoulder, just on the neck, and that will allow that case to slide in more gently. Now, if you're doing a very long dimensional resizing operation, it's also beneficial if you trim this parent case down to the length of your new case before you begin, because there's no need in resizing brass that's going to be cut off anyway. So rather than putting your die through that stress and strain and your press and your own labor, cut your brass down first before you begin, and that will ensure that you don't have to cut it all the way down, because sometimes it changes the dimensions of the length as it's resized. But cut it down to approximately the length of your new case before you begin your sizing operation. And just, again, don't lube the shoulder. Don't ever lube the shoulder whatsoever, because that's going to start a wrinkle, and that wrinkle will grow all the way down into your new shoulder. So you don't want to do that. So now, let's go ahead and start resizing. I've got my proper shell holder in there, and I've got my sizing die set exactly the same way that I would set it for just a standard resizing operation. So all we're doing really, just pretend you're resizing. I've got the insides of the cases lubed up with one pass with my brush, and the cases are all lubed. So just push it right in. voila, now we have a 3006 case. The only thing that we don't have is a new head stamp, so you're going to have to be sure to organize your case. You don't want to get them mixed up and get them in the wrong batches. So we'll do that a couple more times so you can see how easy it is. There's absolutely there's no drag whatsoever with that expanding rod. With that little bit of lubrication, it goes right up in. You don't want to have so much that it creates a crown of lubrication at the top when you push the brush in. If you got a big crown of lubrication on there, make sure you wipe it off, because that's going to travel down to your shoulder and that's going to create a wrinkle or a dent. Now that we've got all our cases reformed, we just attend to the last cleanup measure here, which is to consult our book and observe that 2.494 is the length of a 3006 Springfield case, which is shorter, considerably shorter than the 270 case from which we made it. So we need to trim them up. Now 2.494 is the maximum case length. Standard practice is to reduce the case by 0.010 of an inch. And you don't have to trim them to the maximum length each time. You should always trim 0.010 less than the maximum. And as a matter of note, if your cases happen to be slightly short, for instance, if you're making 270 cases from 3006 cases, which end up being shorter than necessary, they're perfectly all right to shoot in the 270. They're not the ideal. They don't meet specification, but they're perfectly safe to shoot. They'll give perfectly good support to the bullet, and I've used plenty of cases like that, and they give very good performance. So that's all we need to do. 2.494 minus 0.010 of an inch is 2.484. We'll go to the trimmer. Now, I've only got 40 cases to do, so this is not a big laborious job, but if I had more to do than that, I would take the handle off this shaft here and chuck my electric drill onto it and have them done in a jiffy. But I'll just continue along and do these, and the final part of the job is to chamfer and bevel the outside. So chamfering them is just a matter of just a couple of quick passes like that, and then clean off the outside. The only goal is to take the sharp edge off of this brass and to chamfer the inside just enough to receive your bullet without shaving the ring off your bullet. You do not want to make a knife edge, because you want to have strong enough brass there that it maintains some strength. Now, if you want to save yourself a little bit of labor, you can get one of these inexpensive turners and just one slight pull, one pull like that, and we've done it without having to get my fingers sore. So there you go. Very, very simple operation. Well, a very funny thing happened on the way to the farm. My last video, I talked myself into a 3006. I've had 3 of them in my life, and I've developed all kinds of loads, and I've let them slip through my fingers. Well, I've got another one coming soon. It was a deal I couldn't pass up. It was a fantastic deal, and I'll let you in on it when I make my next video and show you. So anyway, thanks for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and God bless.